Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be the 2022 Avatar Year in Review. One of the 3 videos I always do to round off each year for Avatar. So you will have already seen on the channel my top 5 story moments for Avatar and Korra this year. And then in just a few days you will see my 2023 Avatar story and merchandise preview. And of course, this one is the middle video, the year in review. So just before we get into that, I do want to mention that I do have YouTube channel membership enabled on the channel. If you want to help support the channel, this is how you can do it. There are 2 tiers available, and you can see on screen what is available at basically both tiers. And then if you go for the higher tier, the Avatar tier, you do also get access to some exclusive videos that I put up on the channel. Most of these are videos that I wouldn't usually put up on the channel, gaming videos and stuff like that. The recent Pokemon Violet video is sort of an example of one of those exclusive videos I made public on the channel. But I also have recently like a Sonic Frontiers video, a Destiny video will also be coming out in the next couple of days, and stuff like that. So yeah, again, this is there mainly to help support the channel if you so wish. It does really help. So with that out of the way, let's get into the year in review. So how do I judge the quality of a year in Avatar? There are 3 things for me. New story content released in the year, notable news from the year, and merchandise released in the year. Story content, I weigh the highest of these 3. Merchandise usually needs to be really strong and incredible in a year to really shape how a year is and play a big role, in my opinion. So most of the time merchandise is mainly like a bonus. Doesn't play too much of a role. News also sort of completely depends on like what news we actually get, what the details actually are, because you don't want to praise 2022 too much for just having a bunch of news about stuff that will happen in 2023. You sort of want to have news that kind of actually impacts 2022 and makes 22 memorable. So let's jump into some of the bigger things that we're kind of excited about and what information we got on them first of all. So first, Netflix Avatar live action. Very weird year for this. I think I'm not the only one who expected that we would probably have some sort of a teaser trailer or at least a first look by the end of this year. So it was weird that we got literally just the entire cast announcement and basically nothing else. For an adaptation, the secrecy around this show seems surprisingly odd. Now, people tell me that this is just Netflix in general. You don't tend to hear much until it's pretty close to release. But it's weird in terms of hype generation. Like, what are we meant to feel about this when they're not saying or showing too much? So yeah, I was surprised that there was no teaser trailer or even a first look at the characters in costume. The casting itself seems fine. But as someone who doesn't really follow actors, I can only judge when I get to see them in costume and in footage how they actually are. 2023 does look like it will be the year that is like the focus on both marketing, build-up, and I think also the release of season 1 of this show. So even if there's not news elsewhere for Avatar next year, this pretty much has to be a focus for next year. So unfortunately this year not so much, but next year looks decent for this. Then we go into Avatar Studios, where most of the hype is, most of the hope is for Avatar. But it was another year where we didn't really learn too much about Avatar Studios, and specifically the animated projects they're working on. But these were the key points of information. We got the first 3 projects confirmed as animated movies. So we knew they were planning movies, but getting confirmation specifically that it seems like the plan for the first project is for 3 movies. These 3 movies are not adaptations of comics or novels or anything like that, nor do they seem to be a trilogy where these movies are connected outside of being part of the Avatar franchise. The first movie then at San Diego Comic-Con got confirmed to be ATLA focused on Aang and his friends, which was nice to know, but obviously not much of a big announcement given that it ends up being one of the bigger announcements for Avatar Studios this year. It's just like, wow, you're going to do a movie about the most popular thing in the franchise. Stunning. Directed by Lauren Montgomery, so a series veteran coming back is really nice to see. The animation studio got confirmed to be Flying Bark Animation, which most people are very excited about. The animation style also got clarified over the course of the year, kind of switching from at the start of the year, us believing it was more sort of CG with 2D to actually more being, no, it's going to be primarily 2D with CG. Now, you might think that, oh, I don't want CG in Avatar, but that's just how animation is. Like 2D animation basically always uses CG somewhere in an episode or in a movie at some point. Both Avatar and Korra both basically did this as well. Now, it does seem like they're trying to do something maybe slightly different in terms of developing more of a house style to create a really strong consistency across all of their projects. We'll see how exactly that turns out, but they are, it seems like, aiming to try and still have that memorable Avatar and Korra look, so that is notable. And you know, with Brian in charge of art and stuff like that, he's not going to let these look wildly different than what we expect. We also got the release date for the first movie, October 10th, 2025. So quite far into the future in that, like, if there's any delays at all, that is a 2026 release. So it is a year further on than what we were maybe predicting, which was more of a late 2024 release. But of course, these things take time. And in that sense, you know, it is understandable. Given how far off those animated projects are, getting even that minimal amount of information is actually like reasonably good. But of course, a lot of getting us through the year was kind of reliant on kind of like leaked information and stuff like that. But the issue with Avatar Studios, and there has to be another side to this, is that Avatar Studios is more than just about the new animated projects. It is a studio over all things Avatar. And I don't think we're really seeing the impact of Avatar in Avatar Studios in that sense. Most of what we have felt has probably been the slowdown for the comics due to the formation of Avatar Studios, rather than anything particularly more positive happening. Now that we've been with sort of Avatar Studios, we've known about it for nearly 2 years. We need to see what the plan is to actually get us to late 2025, because that's the thing that we're not quite seeing here. Is there just an expectation that we just wait and hope to generate hype in 2025, late 2024? What about next year? What about early 2024? Like, what's the plan? We complain about Dark Horse's communication, but Avatar Studios doesn't even have any social media channels, nor is there a website for the franchise or Avatar Studios. For many fans, Avatar Studios still doesn't really feel real. It's still just that logo, that one red logo, the only image ever associated with Avatar Studios. And that's the problem. Of hardcore fans know what the situation is, but people who just hear about, like, oh, new Avatar stuff is coming out, what do we know? It's kind of like, well, here's all this kind of scattered information, and it's very difficult to explain to people, like, what the full kind of scenario is. And it's always a bit of a, like, oh, so I don't need to get hyped for another couple of years. Okay. And that's a bit of the frustration here of, like, are we trying to keep the hype up? Or are we trying to calm things down and then build it up again? I'm not really sure what exactly the plan is. And the current social media channels that we have, while official, feel like they need to evolve to coincide more with Avatar Studios. Next, the other side of this is that when Mike and Brian do actually talk about the aim and the approach of Avatar Studios, they talk about it being this big plan for multiple projects across multiple formats. Animation, comics, novels, everything. This is what Avatar Studios is there for, to have a studio over everything Avatar. And right now, it does feel like there is a disconnect between what we're being told and what we see. Most of that is because Avatar Studios in general just feels very secretive. It feels like we are just in the same position as before, except when we would usually refer to Paramount, Viacom, Nick as being what's slowing things down, we now kind of just mean Avatar Studios. So the cynical view on this is basically, have we just changed the name for the red tape kind of that restricts communication and holds things back. Right now, we haven't seen anything that like suggests or really shows us the true hype of Avatar Studios, in my mind. But obviously, it is a long-term plan. These things take time. Big animated projects take a lot of time. They are still, I suppose, technically still in the early stages of things. But the problem is that I don't think they're communicating well enough to even explain that much. And it's affecting things sort of across the board, where like Avatar Studios aren't communicating themselves, which in turn means a lot of the license holders and the likes of Dark Horse and stuff like that, they can't communicate enough either. And so we end up feeling like we have no clue what the franchise direction is at the moment for what was the plan for 2022, what's the plan for 2023 and 2024. It's clear we know what you're doing in 2025, but that's a huge amount of time in between, and I don't know what the idea is, because that's the point here. 2021 was not a fantastic year for Avatar. This year also, for the most part, really wasn't either. So, will it be next year? Or are we just going to be saying the same thing again? That I feel I've said these things before. Are we just moving our optimism on from year to year as these delays and the times slip by, basically? I don't want to get to the end of 2023 and still feel like we're just going off scraps, because the idea, the ambition of Avatar Studios feels like it's meant to be more than just wait 4 years to get an animated movie. And I think that's the problem here with this. So, understandable that they're taking their time on the animation, but they need to improve on the rest of the franchise in terms of their impact on novels and what we're going to do before the movies, because it's a long period of time. That's where the improvement needs to be. Next, and to add in some last minute in the year news, we did actually over the course of the year get a decent amount of insider information and rumors. Now, to be fair, by the time we got like our official information throughout the year, it kind of felt like, the insider information is a little bit up in the air. But then, right just a few days before the end of the year, Avatar News did drop some pretty big updates that at least give us a bit of a sense of like our kind of roadmap going forward. Even if they're officially not giving us that roadmap, it was nice to get a sense for what they are doing that is just beyond those officially announced movies. And so you can see here, for the most part, the only hype around Avatar Studios this year really came from this insider information, where we got an idea for the planned projects as well as the release schedule once we get to Project 1, the movie, in 2025. The key part of this, in terms of the schedule, is that the rumors suggest that 2025, 2026, and 2027 will each have a movie and a show. Yes, that sounds the way it's written there. That means 2025 will have a movie and a show. 2026 will have a movie and a show. 2027, also movie and a show. So at least 6 projects in these 3 years if they can hit that schedule. The 2025 lineup is sort of at the point where it can actually be revealed by insider sources, and it's going to be the known ATLA adult gang movie that we know about. And the series, the show, is going to be about the Earth Avatar after Korra, which is very, very interesting to think about. It's obviously going to be something very, very different than what we've seen before, but moving forward past Korra does make sense as something that somewhere in Avatar Studios they were going to do. It's just maybe a little bit of a surprise to see them do it so early, but it does mean 2025 is this definitely interesting mix of continuing on your like oldest content, ATLA, while also actually expanding the franchise into new stuff. But along with this, there is also some teases about sort of, okay, so what are the projects for 2026 and 2027? They seem like they're a little bit more in flux at this point in time, but the suggestion is that a Kyoshi movie is somewhere in the development. It might not be within these 3 years, but it's definitely a real thing being talked about. There probably realistically is a Korra project in here as well. Again, I don't think the exact details on where it is in the lineup anywhere. And then apparently this rumored Zuko movie from earlier on in the year is still a thing. It is separate than this first ATLA movie. highlighting, I guess, that one's going to be maybe more general, focused on maybe like Aang actually being the focus, whereas the Zuko movie, of course, probably opens the door for more kind of royal family focused drama, and maybe Azula fans might be more looking at that movie to be where the Azula content really happens. But we have to wait and see on that, because again, the whole point of this is that this is reporting on stuff that is probably, even officially internally in Avatar Studios, still in flux, and so reporting on that is also a bit of a trouble. But it gives you that sense for just a contrast between officially Avatar Studios put out very little to really generate hype, but the insider information is giving us that kind of like early hint of like, okay, when we get there, it's going to be really, really big. It's just the gulf between unofficial and official information needs to close. Part of that is, of course, that for the most part, the channels for official information aren't really open at the moment, and it feels purely random when we do get information on Avatar Studios. And that's the core kind of coming out of this, is just it needs to be better kind of like across the board officially to, you know, clarify some of this stuff. So hopefully next year we'll at the very least know and get exact confirmation on the lineup. And if it is this movie and Earth Avatar After Korra situation, that's pretty exciting. But does insider information at the end of the year like make the year a ton better? In my mind, not really, because again, the official stuff would change that. Unofficial, it's nice, but other than getting a little bit excited, it's still talking about stuff that's like 3+ years into the future. Story content. So yeah, this was an interesting year for story content. It's hard to be critical of a year where we got a full new novel, but you look at the rest of it and it's kind of like, okay, cool. The Avatar Legends role-playing game gave us a very interesting style of information with all the lore, background information. The Roku stuff was fantastic, so that's a bonus. But then it's kind of clear here. Dark Horse just dropped the ball. Dark Horse did not have a good year in terms of new story content. We got 6 Korra short stories, but there's problems across the board. There should be an Avatar story here, but there's not. There's issues with the Free Comic Book Day book and why it's only 1 short story. Patterns in Time, while a solid book, is not enough as the main comic release of the year. It's 5 short stories, but one of them's a 2-page story, one of them's a 4-page story. You're beginning to see kind of what the problem is. They didn't release much this year that is new and really interesting. And it's a big contrast to Avatar Legends being one of the more impressive extra books of the year, and a full-on Avatar novel in The Dawn of Yang Chen. So in terms of other books, you can see here kind of part of what the problem was for Dark Horse. They still got their reprints out. Look at all those reprints. Book 3, Book 4, Art Book, 2nd editions, Deluxe editions, North and South Omnibus, Turf Wars Omnibus, and then they decided to reprint, do the kind of collected edition of the one-shots in Team Avatar Treasury, a box set with poster release instead of a library edition. And then there's some other stuff there that's not as kind of important. So a lot of the omnibus stuff and the art book stuff is like, cool, add it to the collection, but it itself, getting to the end of the runs of these reprints is getting a little bit dull, because we know what the art book re-release kind of format exactly is. We know what the omnibuses are like, which meant that the only really interesting one for them was Team Avatar Treasury. And there's positives to this, and I like the inclusion of a poster, but I don't like that they just completely changed the format for this collected edition and never asked, never communicated, because I think people want a larger collected edition for these 3 comics to add to their collection if you have all the other ones. Why is this being treated so differently? And it's just that sense of consistency of collection for a company that typically does stuff quite well with the omnibus editions and the deluxe sets and stuff like that. It was weird to see this be their new release, but I don't really know what their plan is necessarily. So, a solid enough year for other books, But let's get into some kind of highlights from the publishers from this year. So Dark Horse's main positive from the year was that they did make Avatar and Korra comic announcements. So a positive in the communication department is that they finally, for the first time in quite a while, got out ahead of everything and made like basically an early announcement of their plans for next year. They announced that in summer 2023 we're going to be getting Azula in the Spirit Temple, the next one-shot comic. They are suggesting, and speaking about this, if it's going to be kind of like different from the other one-shots, it's a new approach in a way here, and they didn't explain really more than that, but they're teasing this like it's they're mentioning, like, will this be the redemption of Azula? That this is Azula confronting her past. The impression I get is that what they mean by this is that this is going to be an attempt at an important story told in a one-shot. It's not just a random story that includes that character. This is advancement for this character. Azula has the most important arc that's still open in the comics. We haven't returned to it in so many years. It feels like this is an attempt where, like, we can't fully advance the story past Imbalance, but we can move Azula forward since it's been a while since we've seen her. And if that's the new approach, I'm kind of here for it if that's what they're able to do. So exciting stuff with the Azula comic, because everyone wants more Azula content, and it's a really exciting prospect. They also announced a Korra comic trilogy with the first book focused on Mako, which again is cool. They didn't have too much to say about this one because it's a late 2023 release, but this is where the kind of flip side comes in. Poor communication with the positive communication. And that is that they never said if the Azula comic is part of a one-shot trilogy. It was just a kind of one-off announcement. Faith Erin Hicks and Peter Wortman as the creative team usually work in kind of groups of 3 books, so there will be an expectation that this would be followed by others, but that was never mentioned. Then, because they did this kind of announcement across San Diego Comic-Con and then added onto that at New York Comic-Con, with the Korra comic at San Diego, they said Korra comic trilogy. They announced the creative team late 2023, and everyone took from this as, oh, Korra comic trilogy. That means this is going to be the third, like, Turf Wars, Ruins of the Empire. This one, it's a part 1, part 2, part 3 comic. But then they talked about it at New York Comic Con, and their communication heavily leaned in the direction that this is going to be one-shot comics, because how do you do a 3-part comic where Mako is the focus of, like, the very first part? That probably has to mean Mako one-shot. But the lack of clarification is kind of the problem here. You communicated early, which is great, but you didn't give enough detail. That's part of the problem here overall. And it continues for Dark Horse. The worst example of poor communication in 2022 has to be what happened with the 2022 free comic. Announced as a dual Avatar and Korra comic like in 2021, which was a really, really strong release, they even put out a blog post revealing the creative team for both comics. As you can see, it says there, the Avatar The Last Airbender short story will be written by Amy Chu and illustrated by Kicking Shoes, while the Legend of Korra short story will be written and illustrated by Meredith McLaren. So great, people were excited for this. We saw the cover, you can see Aang is on the cover. Then the book comes out, and sure, we get the Korra story. It's Beach Wars, as expected, with the creator as teased. The ATLA story is not in the book, nowhere to be seen. Instead, it's a preview for the Chibi comic, which was a 2022 release, now has been delayed into 2023. So the whole point of this free comic book day book wasn't even sort of almost like fit for purpose, because it wasn't a preview for a book that was just about to come out, because it was like, it's going to be 7 months by the time the book actually does come out. So, missing stuff across the board here. They never said anything about why this Amy Chu story disappeared, because obviously it probably represents the cover more than the Chibi comic does. Not really sure what the intent is here. The only thing I can think of is that they did announce the next year's free comic, and it will have Avatar, but it won't have Korra, because it's going to be an Avatar and Star Wars Dark Horse free comic. So we will get an ATLA story. So are they just putting this missing Amy Chu story into next year's free comic? Keep an eye out to see if that is the case. It'll be very interesting if that is what actually happens. Otherwise, no clue whatsoever what happened here at all. Then I think we have to talk about delays for Dark Horse. I'm a little bit more kind of like understanding of this. Like, I get it. Delays happen. And across the board, we are going to ultimately talk about how delays did affect nearly everything Avatar this year. The problem, and I think what needs to be pushed back on, is again, it's a communication problem from Dark Horse. When they do communicate with the fandom, they will just say, basically, do you not know there's a pandemic on? Do you not know that there's shipping issues and printing issues and all this sort of stuff? As if like you are an idiot for complaining about release date delays when you know things are hard and difficult. The problem is they never seem to acknowledge the specificity that we're saying with regards to what's actually happening here. So in white, you can see reprint books. In yellow, you can see new content books. And you can sort of see the difference. Reprint books either hit their date or get minimally delayed, where the most heavily delayed book is like a month and like a half, if even that. Nothing has been delayed more than that in quite a long time. And even then, a lot of the delays for these reprint books ended up actually being last minute delays to one particular distributor, not another one. Then you look at the news story content. And, you know, Patterns in Time, delayed by what, like 8 months, basically. Chibi Volume 1, delayed from a 2021 release date into 2023, across so many different delays and issues and stuff like that. And then the problem with this, and what kind of counters a lot of what they say about why these delays happen, is that they have had these problems with news story content well before the pandemic. Team Avatar Tales, which is a similar type of book to Patterns in Time, was also just as heavily delayed across its kind of release window. So it does feel like the new story content stuff gets hit harder than anything else. And they've never really acknowledged why that is the case. And that's the issue that people actually have. People get it. Delays do happen, but I don't think they've done enough to explain the details surrounding it and why it seems to affect the books that we're truly interested in and not some of the other ones. And finally, on Dark Horse, continuing the trend of bad communication, in this case misinformation, all of their new comics have descriptions that don't match the final product. Patterns in Time on the back in the marketing material mentions Mako and Bolin being featured. Neither character is in the book at all in any capacity. They don't even appear in the background of a single scene. They're just completely forgotten. That's misinformation. Free Comic Book Day 2022, we already covered it. There's a whole Avatar story missing from what they promoted to what we actually got in the end. How do you have that happen? The Chibi Comic Volume 1, which again, you know, partially kind of released this year in a way because we got the preview. It was meant to be out this year, got delayed into next year. But anyway, the description for this on the back in the marketing mentions Aang's birthday as being sort of why the story is sort of happening. The actual comic never once brings up Aang's birthday at all. And so there is a huge disconnect between you read the comic and you realize that there's actually more context to the story given on the back of the book than there is in the actual story itself. That there's more interesting information on the back of the book than in the comic. That's crazy that happens. And so what's happening with their marketing material compared to what actually is in the book? That needs to be fixed. That shouldn't happen. But I like that there at least was a slight trend of moving towards better communication right towards the end of the year. And the last example from Dark Horse about poor communication this year has to be the Mystery of Beasts of the Four Nations. The 6th deluxe book as part of that set with the art books was revealed in May 2021. And in all that time, we have still yet to get an official update on this book from Dark Horse. They've never had it on their website. They've never posted about it on social media. To them, the 6th book is still a mystery. I don't understand at all why this has happened. It took something that literally just happened a few days ago, a fan posting a cancellation email on Twitter from their comic store to confirm the status of this book. And what that status is that it has apparently been cancelled by the publisher, Dark Horse Comics, but will be offered again at a later date. Why the delay? Why did official listings go up way ahead of when this book is actually going to come out? I don't understand. Clearly, I think this has to be another example of Avatar Studios forming early 2021, which is, I suppose, in or around the time when we're right in the middle of Dark Horse planning and releasing all these previous deluxe sets. They come in. We know they have affected a lot of Dark Horse's other projects, so I'm guessing this is just another one of the ones that's affected by it. But this is the thing where, like, that makes sense to a certain degree, but also it doesn't make sense, because if this book is happening pre-Avatar Studios and post-Avatar Studios, what has changed? What is actually happening? Is this book going to be better or worse because this has happened? I just don't know, because we don't know if this book ever really got any further than just having the cover made and this stuff designed. Like, is this book half done? Is it all done and they're just waiting to release it at a different point? I don't know. No one knows. And that's not a good situation to be in, especially because this book is the 6th expensive deluxe set in the line of, to follow up 5 other expensive books. For myself and other people who have the 5 already, it's a really frustrating situation to be in, just not knowing what the status of that final book in the series is, not knowing when it's going to happen or really what's going on with it. This is something Dark Horse need to fix going into next year. So, Abrams Books, surprisingly, the best release of the year was also the smoothest release of the year. The Dawn of Yang Chen came out, got announced, came out, no problems. The book itself, the audiobook, everything just kind of came out, no issues. And so, yeah, we just got another quality Avatar novel released with no real fuss or hassle. They did what no other company really was able to do this year and just release a book without there being chaos basically surrounding it. As for the quality and stuff like this, our third Avatar novel, the first kind of one focusing on an Avatar that wasn't Kyoshi, I think in general the reception was very good. I don't think it was quite as hyped or super well received as the Kyoshi books, and that is in a way kind of part of the problem. I think there's been a lot of discussion surrounding the comparison of the Yang Chen book to the Kyoshi books without a lot of, I think, just focus on the Yang Chen book on its own. It's one of those situations where, yes, you are allowed to compare the books because they're all in the same series, it's all Avatar, they're written by the same author. You're allowed to have that comparison. The problem is, I think we a lot of the fandom stuck too much in the comparison and never let the book sort of shine on its own. I think they made a good choice deciding to do something very different with this book than the previous two, to show that going forward, as we get more and more novels, they will be different. They won't all be the exact same as The Rise of Kyoshi, The Shadow of Kyoshi. So going at number 3 and doing something different with the whole spy master angle with Yang Chen and highlighting the politics a little bit more, I think was the correct choice to show that there will be variety. And the book itself, I think, is still very good. I would ultimately agree that I think I right now prefer the Kyoshi novels to this one. But that is not to say that this book is bad. They're all really strong. And what I will say especially about this one is that book 1 of Yang Chen feels like a bit of a setup book, because book 2 is going to basically tackle pretty much everything that book 1 brings up. So I think it is a bit of a different situation than the 2 Kyoshi books, which feel a little bit more standalone while still being connected, whereas these two are very clearly written as book 1, book 2, that we don't resolve too much stuff at the end of book 1, everything is still open going into book 2. So I think book 2 for Yang Chen has the potential to be the best Avatar novel that we have seen. And I like Yang Chen as a character, Kavik was fantastic in the book, and there are some really strong moments throughout this one. So I think we just need to kind of give it a little bit more chance to shine on its own, not always go into the comparison, and just let it shine a bit more. So that was good for Abrams Books there with the novel release, but then they followed it up with probably one of the most disappointing releases of the year. because the 2022 calendar from last year was a really cool piece of merchandise. I think everyone was surprised with just how cool and interesting it was for a calendar. So the 2023 calendar was kind of hyped to see what art is going to be included in it and so on, especially when initially it was announced as having 12 new illustrations, that it would include the likes of Karuk and Yue, who weren't featured in the first one, and as far as we were aware, the artist had never done images for those characters. So there was a lot of hype. They opened up pre-orders with that as the description. And then as the months went on, they changed the description. We actually saw what the calendar was going to look like. And as you can see from the fronts, it's basically the same. And I can say, having owned both these calendars, the insides are effectively the same. Like it says in the new description there, it is literally just updated for 2023. They changed it from being all new to just being, yeah, we just updated the previous one. Most of the images are exactly the same, and it feels like such a low effort release. Again, I want to know what happened here. Did they just not bother wanting to pay the artist for new art? Was that not able to happen on time? What happened here? I don't know at all, but it is a very notable difference between Dawn of Yang Chen, best release of the year, and then hyped release being one of the most disappointing of the year. Moving on to Magpie Games. So, hugely successful Kickstarter from the end of last year. This was the year to deliver. For the most part, they succeeded, but the delays were a constant frustration. Their communication was regular, but it was lacking in detail a lot of the time. We got the digital books, and eventually the physical stuff shipped. As of the recording of this video, that is still in progress and happening. The books themselves were received well, both by those interested in the game and those only interested in the lore, the new information. The incredible new art was a huge highlight of the year as well, seeing people freak out about all the new art that we got in this. So you have to be okay, for the most part positive. The delays, it's a lot more understandable, I think, some of what they dealt with compared to say Dark Horse's just unwillingness to acknowledge certain things. But I do feel that the issue with them and communication was more that they would wait and wait and wait to give what they felt was more of a concrete estimate or example. And then when they gave it, that would inevitably fall through as well. So it's just sort of wait, you waited 3 months to give us this estimate, and then this estimate is also off by a month in the end. So why didn't you just communicate earlier and just say that it's a very early estimate? It's just that sort of thing of just there were a few gaps where it felt like some of these updates should have had a little bit more information, and they just held back needlessly, especially when in the end the information wasn't particularly concrete overall. But now that the stuff is actually starting to ship, those months don't matter as much, but it was still a frustration at the time. So overall, story content and books this year, The Dawn of Yang Chen definitely saved 2022. We had no novel last year, and it was noticed so much. The Legends RPG was a nice new style of book with some cool details, but realistically it needs actual stories to add onto this lore to make it feel more important. That Princess Zaysan was interesting, but can we get a story with her? Because the problem I think that we faced with a lot of that book was that they were ideas for stories and there was no conclusion to a lot of it. So we don't know what happens to Zaysan. Are we ever going to find that out? Will it be revealed in Legends RPG information, or will there be official content with her at some point down the road? But in general, cool, and I'm excited to see the supplementary material come out that adds more. Dark Horse then, of course, had a rough year. Mostly reprints and a shockingly low amount of new content, all of which was heavily delayed or had weird problems associated with it. Not a single page of ATLA comic content, and Beasts of the Four Nations was still MIA the entire year. Dark Horse have problems. They definitely needed to fix some stuff. I'll be kinder to them because I do feel they can't communicate as well as they want to because Avatar Studios has a lot of red tape up behind the scenes, but they themselves do need to improve as well. So that ends that section, and we move on to merchandise. So a note just before we get into this, as ever, there's so much merch every year that I don't have the time to include everything in this section. So I'll mainly be focusing on the notable kind of companies who release the kind of standout pieces of merchandise. But interestingly, this year was surprisingly light on notable merchandise, especially so since 2021 was actually a really good year for merchandise. Looking back on it, it really was. This is where you notice the shipping issues and delays because they affected basically everything in this department. Everything was delayed, not a lot of information about what's next, and you'll see that as we go through. So we'll start with Funko Pops, which in previous years have been a big positive in that, you know, they're just very accessible, pretty cool if you like them, and there's a decent selection of characters. But after a great 2021 for Funko Pops with Avatar, they followed it up this year with NFT digital card packs to get a chance at new figures. And this was a decision that just completely soured a lot of Avatar fans on Funko, like across the board, knowing that they can't complete their collection because there's all of these cool, interesting new pops locked behind this system that most people just don't want to interact with at all. And the problem with this was that this is very, very valid criticism for in the middle of a collection, you going from buying things a certain way to now buy these weird digital card packs to get a chance at something. People are allowed to be annoyed at that, and you saw a lot of people who are really into NFTs come out and criticize people because they don't like this and being like, hey, interact with it, it's cool, it actually is easier than you think. And it's like, no, I just want the pop, you know, it shouldn't be this complicated. And especially the fact that like the likes of Karuk was locked behind this, the first ever Bolin pop, and those were the only other Korra pops that came out this year. Really, really frustrating. And that just a lot of people were like, well, guess I'm done collecting Avatar Funko Pops because, you know, why am I going to interact with a company who does stuff like that? Beyond that, like, I found it very hard to actually keep track of what actually did and didn't come out this year for Funko and other companies as well. I know this Katara I have on screen came out, the kind of exclusive waterbending Katara. Other than that, like, there was that exclusive Ozai and Azula that got revealed at the end of last year, which I guess technically released this year, but I didn't get my copies of them, so I don't really know what the situation is, but they are releasing, I guess. The Loyal Subjects up next. So they had a solid year with their first full wave of figures released. This, in addition to the chibi figures, made for a good year for the Loyal Subjects with Avatar. The only negative is the lack of information about what is next. And this is another thing across the board with merchandise, is just the idea that, do I want to buy this wave of action figures, not knowing if this company will actually do another wave of action figures? That's the problem, is that, like, say the chibis here, we have not heard anything about if there's going to be any beyond the first 5. Are you doing a wave 2? What characters will be included or not? I don't know. The same goes for, like, you know, apart from this big wave of figures, they didn't announce any for kind of up next. So that's the only thing with them, is that they seemed like the kind of information getting out to collectors wasn't particularly fantastic, but people seem to like their figures. They're not quite my favorite kind of style of action figures, in that they feel like the QC is a bit kind of not quite where it needs to be on these figures, and that's why they're not really the figures I'm interested in, but I would like to see more chibis. Next, Diamond Select Toys. So the first company to start making Avatar figures again after so long had a very, very light year, only releasing their Blue Spirit and Iroh wave of action figures right at the end of the year. Like, I think these were meant to be more of an early 2022 release, and I think they only ended up actually coming out in like September or October, so these got very heavily delayed in the year. The other point is that it looks like these will be their last figures, action figures, that they're putting out, because I think in a blog post when someone asked a question. They answered it basically saying that like we are looking at the market to see if we want to do more. And in comparison to what they said about the question about will you do more gallery diorama figurines, they were like, oh yeah, more are coming. We're just not ready to announce them yet. So you can see the contrast there of they maybe either haven't decided or have already decided and aren't just going to say anything. But it does feel like Diamond Select are probably done with the Avatar action figures, which I'm pretty okay with because they were never the most fantastic action figures overall when you actually like messed around with them. But the gallery dioramas I am very, very excited for. So it is good to know more are coming. But this year only actually saw the release of a repaint of the Aang as an exclusive in this kind of antique version, which looks kind of nice. But again, I have this figure in its normal form. I don't want the exact same figure, just painted slightly differently. But I'm excited to see them do like a Toph, Sokka, Suki, and more in gallery diorama. I was very disappointed to not even see an announcement of one of the new figures this year, but hopefully next year for DST. So then QMX. Remember QMX? Another company that just had a weird year with Avatar. These were quite exciting announcements from the end of last year. They had the Aang figure actually released, the Q-Fig, and some of the plushes, the Q-Pals. But as far as I can tell, nothing actually released this year. The Sokka and Katara figures got delayed and I think are still not out yet, and I think might be scheduled for like January next year, and nothing else really announced either. So bit of a weird one in that regard. Then we have McFarlane Toys, which were one of the only companies to actually put out multiple waves of figures this year. I think they were personally a little bit let down by the lack of character selection, especially in the larger figure category, mainly doing redos of Aang and Zuko, and Sokka being the only addition, meaning like, 2 waves in, we have 3 characters. That's not good. The smaller scale was better, of course, and they had like the cool 4-pack at the end of the year. The Komodo Rhino was very nice. And I look forward to seeing what they announce next in terms of like, it feels like the likes of Suki, Mei, Tai Li have to happen eventually. And at that scale is probably where we're going to see them first and foremost. And especially the animal size class. I hope the next one is a dragon or a badger mole, because I'll be all over that if they actually put something like that out. So, solid enough year for McFarlane, but where are the Korra figures, given that they announced they have that license too? Next, Displate. So, discovered by the fandom right towards the end of the year. Through it, we found some cool official art, and it turns out the metal posters that they offer are pretty nice as well. They also communicated well with the fandom, confirming more ATLA images coming, and that Korra images are on the way eventually also. This is good. Like, these have been around for a while, but the fandom only found out about them, and then them acknowledging that the fandoms found out about them communicated well to keep people's interest, and it seems to be a very good product as well. So, positive thing, worth the inclusion here in the video right at the end. Next, U2. So while Funko had a bad year for Avatar, U2's filled the gap for that style of chibi figure. They released both Avatar and Korra waves, something not too many companies managed to do this year. So that was sort of cool. The only thing that holds, I think, people back on these is that they're not as accessible as the likes of Funko Pops. They are, I think, twice the price of Funko Pops as well, typically. But they are nice to have that option, and it's cool that more companies are doing stuff like this. Then we go into kind of other merch, and there's just a few other kind of cool things that came out this year. The kind of interesting kind of oddball item that is, like, say, the Fisher Price Avatar set, the Fire Nation Rising game, and so on. But it is notable. It has to be noted here. Where's the Korra merchandise? Like, there's barely anything Korra over the course of like the entire year. And why was that the case? Because getting into other notable news from the year, The Korra 10-year anniversary was this year, 2012 to 2022. A notable year, 10 years of Korra, and the excitement is still there. This is always a notable anniversary, 10 years. And unfortunately, it wasn't really celebrated in any official capacity. Now, anniversaries are always weird, but I feel like, given that we are 2 years into Avatar Studios, I expected a little bit more than like a logo. We got a logo posted, like I think, on the actual anniversary, and that was really about it. Dark Horse happened to get sort of lucky that they had some Korra books that kind of came out this year, but most of them were reprints, and realistically none of them were made for the anniversary, so nothing particularly happened. And yeah, Patterns in Time nearly got delayed out of the year, and next to no Korra merchandise over the course of the entire year. And it just felt like it was relatively forgotten for the most part, especially in the merchandise. And there were only a few kind of times when there was like a crossover thing that included Avatar, where it was both Avatar and Korra. But not a lot of focus on Korra, which was unfortunate. I think the fandom itself made an effort to try and be positive towards Korra this year. Of course, I participated in the One Legendary Scene kind of event, basically putting out a video about it, and other people did too. But there's only so much I think the fandom could do when it's not backed up officially by, you know, the company over the whole franchise, basically. So next piece of big news is just that basically anytime there was the release of new official art, people got very, very excited. This generated hype. And this is a thing that is both cool, but also very telling of where we are right now in the fandom. That basically official art gets us more excited than nearly anything else that comes out in the year. And most of it isn't even of anything that's inherently new. It's just new stock pieces of art that will be used on merch, art from books that is just depicting stuff that is already in the franchise. But it's really cool art, and it's nice to see, and it highlights that when we do start to get the art that is from the brand new stuff, people are going to absolutely freak out. So it's sort of this was a preview of things to come when things start to get more exciting for the Avatar franchise. But there's some wonderful pieces of art across the stuff that actually came out this year, and especially those chapter start pieces of art from the RPG game were really, really, really good. Next, the soundtrack release is about to happen, I guess, maybe? Is it actually confirmed? Yes, I think you have to lean in that direction. So, in a podcast interview, Mike, Brian, and Jeremy Zuckerman all mentioned that things are in a much more positive place with regards to the official soundtrack release. A clear yes from basically everyone involved that it will happen. A mention of phone calls, and that is pretty much just like a step or two away from actually happening, that it's something they really all want to happen. Then, after this, Jeremy Zuckerman posted this image on Instagram with the only explanation for it being that the soundtrack is happening and the required re-recordings seem to be happening. That's why it says ATLA Book 1 OST, concert score, and has tracks that are very clearly from episodes from Book 1. Why else would this be happening? That's the only thing that can explain it. So, positive, hopefully this happens sooner rather than later, and that will be a big thing when it does eventually happen. So next, video games. So Avatar had more tie-ins with other video games this year, including Brawlhalla, where we got some kind of character reskins for other characters, I believe is what it was. And then especially a rather large DLC with Minecraft that features, it's full-on Avatar Legends, includes like multiple avatars, like what feels like the entire cast of ATLA and Korra almost in this thing. If you're a fan of Minecraft, it feels like this is perfect for you, that exists. But we did also start to get information on actual Avatar video games. So the first one was just Avatar Quest for Balance. Now, there's no imagery associated with this because, again, the information, like everything in Avatar this year, was a bit all over the place. It is going to be a console and PC game. Apparently, it's an action game that covers the story of ATLA, with the twist being that it's the Order of the White Lotus members retelling the events. It was apparently meant to be out this year in November, but it now looks like it's going to be a Q1 2023 game. There's not a ton of hype behind this, just because it does look like it's just going to be a kind of tie-in Avatar game, nothing new necessarily. The developer attached to it doesn't seem like it has a lot of hype behind it, and just in general, the lack of official information about it. Until we get the marketing starting on this one, it's going to be difficult to get super hyped for it. But I'm going to be definitely up for playing an Avatar video game, kind of in a way, regardless of how good it does or doesn't look. That's just an exciting thing to happen. Because sure, all these tie-ins happening to other games is cool, but I'd also like to just play an Avatar video game for the first time in years. Speaking of which, we did get some more proper details on the Avatar Generations mobile game. So this is a mobile game that went into beta this year in a few countries, so some people are actually able to play this. There hasn't been official information in months about the proper release and what exactly is happening, and there's been some confusion in recent times about what's going on in regards to, like, I think the company over this was bought by someone else, but then it kind of fell apart, and has this affected the development of this game at all in any way? We don't really know. My understanding is that on the official Discord for this, the game is still able to be played by the people who have the beta. They are still submitting their feedback. The developers seem to still be communicating with people, working on fixes, and some updates have come out as of at least a few weeks ago. So it feels like it's still going ahead. It feels like it's far enough kind of complete as a game that they're not just going to scrap this last minute. As for what the game is, it seems to be your standard franchise mobile game with which is an RPG with basic turn-based battles where you have a variety of items and currency to keep upgrading your characters, and of course a gacha system to get new characters in the first place. The cool things about it seem to be that, okay, it's going to have, of course, ATLA and the stuff that we expect, of course, but they are also teasing the idea that this is full-on Avatar legacy, Avatar Generations. There's Aang, Korra, Kyoshi, Yang-Chen, Roku, Wan, Karuk, pretty much every Avatar we know about included in the material we've seen already, and they're straight away committing to there will be events that are specifically focused on these eras. And I think they mentioned Roku specifically, and because the only Roku information is really from either the flashback episode from the show or the Legends RPG, that basically has to have brand new information in it, which is the way that these games actually do typically work, is that they can actually have new information in them. So this is something to keep your eye on. Like, I know a lot of people aren't really interested in this because they don't like playing mobile games, but this theoretically, especially when some of those events start, will have new stuff. Like when the Kyoshi event happens, you will get official art for characters, like you can already see in the image there, Jeonju. We already got official art of him, so that's cool. And obviously the idea is we'll get more of that. So keep your eye on this game if it actually comes out. And then moving away from that stuff into just my channel this year, of course, because it's an Avatar channel. How was this year for me? Because this is a way where I can actually put numbers on it, as like I basically cover everything Avatar. So how popular my channel was this year, how much growth I had this year, is somewhat telling in terms of interest from people across the board. I would say it was a frustrating year on YouTube for me. It felt like I put out some of the best content that I ever have, but because of minimal big news and only a few content releases, I rarely got the opportunity to do what I am best at, the analysis and review content. I gained just under 500 subscribers this year, which is down from the 700 from last year and well down from the 2,700 in 2020. My goal of 10,000 subscribers remains to be hit, and I hope I do get that hopefully by the end of next year. I tried to do live streams as much as possible this year, but again, the lack of news left me not wanting to force topics for streams. Streams especially, I want to only do them when I know that there is a topic that people will tune into a live stream for and chat with me about. I don't want to just pick a random topic just because I need to do a live stream this day and then have no one turn up because they're not interested in it. So that's why I think I only had 4 live streams this year. And going a little bit more in detail on that, I just want to highlight sort of some of my favorite videos from this year in terms of, for me, the year for my channel as well. In no particular order, these are just kind of like 10 video or groups of videos that I liked. The Yang Chen reviews and chapter analysis videos, of course. This was where I felt like I got to shine this year in my content. The Was Aang a Bad Father discussion video, when that topic came up in the fandom again, I was quite happy with what I did there in that one. My video for the One Legendary Scene event, We Must Also Forge Our Own Path, I was super happy with how that video turned out. 4, a little bit of an oddball one, but the Avatar Omnibus Spine Correction video for the comics is just a video I'm happy I made and put up, and that people have a video to go to if they have that same problem. It's about a very minor thing that only affects people who collect the comics, but I'm glad it exists, and it's the sort of detail I go into on my channel. 5, the top 30 details from the Legends RPG video. Very happy with how that one turned out. The What If Asami Was an Equalist discussion. That was a fun one to do, to just go full on what if with Asami. 7, the Azula character discussion that I did just relatively shortly before Azula and the Spirit Temple got announced. That was oddly on time. 8 was the Avatar Novels Beginner's Guide that I put out right when Yang Chen came out. And as much as I like doing the detailed videos on the channel, I am also aware that, hey, I should also do videos to help people get into Avatar in a deeper way. And so having those sort of like how to get into comics, how to get into the novels videos are also stuff that I do like to do. Similarly, I suppose, combustion bending discussion, I just did a full-on deep dive into combustion bending, but it includes everything from sort of the start. So if you don't really know much about combustion bending, it features everything, including the new information about it. And then last, all 4 live streams. I was happy with the 4 that I did. I wished I could have done more, but, not much ended up happening. And I will say straight away, I will be doing another live stream, but I think because of the timing on when Patterns in Time releases everywhere else, it will end up being, I think, first week of January for the next stream. But it will be a Patterns in Time sort of live stream discussion, so be aware that that will be coming in the next couple of weeks. So, to wrap up the video, in conclusion, not a great year for Avatar. Definitely a few highlights, not an awful year either, but not enough to make the year amazing or great. Lots of gaps between the few releases that we got, not helped by the crazy amount of delays for pretty much everything. Again, Korra felt forgotten a bit this year, which was especially noted in the 10-year anniversary year. Things look like they will improve, but only so far it looks like in the second half of 2023. We need to see consistency return to Dark Horse to get the Avatar and Korra comics going again, and no more year-long gaps between releases for these series. Glimmers of hope from the tiny info drops and some of the leaked information that we got about the bigger projects, but we need to see more official communication, official news, and details about the direction for the franchise, basically. It really doesn't feel like we are entering year 3 of Avatar Studios, and so it's one of those things, ending this year, it feels like this was just about acceptable as a year, but I don't know if we can just do this again next year, if that's all that we're going to get. Because Avatar Studios is a thing, we have to expect a little bit more. Expectations, I think, naturally do have to rise a bit. And until they communicate to say, keep things in check until now, and again, I'm not just talking about the animated projects, I'm talking about across the board, Avatar Studios impacting the novels, impacting the comics and so on, because, we don't know for sure Yang Chen Book 2 is next year. It probably will be, but until it is, we don't know. And then we need to see more on just basically everything across the board. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were. What is your Avatar year in review? Did you think it was good? Bad? Do you understand why some of this is happening? Are you critical of some of the companies, Avatar Studios, Dark Horse, or what? And what were your thoughts on everything I had to discuss in this video? And the final thing in the video here is just to thank my Avatar tier channel members for their support on the channel. They are Cash D's, Martine Monterosa, Brit in Toyland, and insert first name here, insert last name here. You can join this list if you join the channel on YouTube at the Avatar tier, if you so wish, to help support the channel. Other than that, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.